maybe I'll just start with an introduction for Tariq, and then in a few minutes he can get started with the actual presentation. Yeah, so Tariq is one of our new hires. He's joined Aquanty this year, and his background is a bit different, and also his main work is a bit different from what most of us do. So his specialty is in ecosystem goods and services, and so in valuation of ecosystem services and environmental economics. So he got a PhD from University of Waterloo, where he developed tools for policymakers and decision makers to manage resources sustainably. And then later he did a PhD with Global Water Futures, a PDF, so a postdoc, and also worked at Environment Canada as an environmental economist. And in Aquanty, he essentially is going to do the same, work as an environmental economist in the sense of translating model outputs into sort of economic metrics that are more relevant for decision making and policy making. And because some of you may know, this is something we've been struggling with in a lot of our projects, because we produce the physical outputs, but often these are not so meaningful to policymakers. Essentially, as long as you can't put a dollar value in something, it's not going to be considered in policy, right? Previously, though, Tariq is actually from Pakistan, and he did his undergrad in environmental engineering. So his background is technical. He's worked as an irrigation engineer there. Then he went abroad and first to Europe, where he did a master's in hydroinformatics and water resource management, where he actually had the opportunity to travel a bit around Europe and worked and took courses in different places around Europe, including Germany. And then after that, he came to Canada. And so with that, I think we can start. It's only, everybody has joined now who was invited. I think we can start. Tariq, can you share your screen and take over?
Yeah, thanks so much, Andre. So I'm just going to share the screen, and please let me know if you can see the full screen.
Yeah, looks good.
Thanks so much, Andre. So as you know, my work has been focusing on economic valuation of ecosystem services. So I will talk about this approach and how we can apply this approach to actually manage our natural resources. So what you expect, or what you should expect from the talk. So I want to show it here that initially I will talk about what are ecosystem services and what are their types. Then, of course, I will talk about valuation of ecosystem services and what type of approaches are being used and what are uses of these economic values of ecosystem services. And most of my time will spend on this, where I will share with you some applications of ecosystem services valuation approach at the local level. So to start with, what are ecosystems? Ecosystems are basically dynamic, actually complexes of living and non-living environments of which humans are integral part. And their examples are lakes, wetlands, and the rivers. So all these, the land uses, are examples of ecosystems, and these are very important land uses because they generate a lot of ecosystem services. So actually, what are ecosystem services? If you look at the literature, ecosystem services are the benefits we receive from nature, and sometimes they're called the components of nature used and enjoyed by the people. And some people say that these are aspects of ecosystem service or ecosystems that are used that are actually used for human well-being. So if we look at these different definitions of ecosystem services, they say one thing, that ecosystem service is only an ecosystem service when it is used by the people. However, if you look at the literature of economic valuation of ecosystem services or only ecosystem services, uh, they actually mainly map the supply side and not the use side. Therefore, I actually modified this definition, and I came up with this definition that these are the benefits which are at our like disposal and we can use and benefit from, but not only the benefit which are being used by the people. So this new or this actually modified definition incorporates the supply and demand of the ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are generated based on the structures and functions of ecosystems, and it is the use of the society or demand of the society that actually separates between the potential and the used ecosystem services. Used ecosystem services are sometimes called the realized ecosystem services. So there are like four major types of ecosystem services. Those are the regulating, provisioning, cultural, and sporting. Actually, regulating and sporting ecosystem services are not in fact ecosystem services, but they are the one which are basically the functions of ecosystems, or actually like different processes which are occurring in ecosystems. So all of these ecosystem services are very important for our well-being because they fulfill our spiritual, psychological, and survival need. And similarly, if you look at water is a like it has many dimensions, for example, physical, cultural, and socio-economic. And water ecosystem services in the same vein, sport or spiritual, physical, and psychological and survival needs. But then why ecosystem services were not being included into actually policy making, as Andre has said. So the reason for this one, this like failure was that we failed to link ecosystem services ecological assessments with actually those indicators that matter to the people. So economic valuation of ecosystem services is basically a human ingenuity which links the biophysical indicators of ecosystem services with economic values, and therefore economic valuation of ecosystem services need more information and data to actually value ecosystem services than it is needed for evaluating biophysical indicators of these ecosystem services. If we look at ecosystem services, some of the ecosystem services they are being sold and actually bought in the markets, for example, water. And there are many ecosystem services which don't have any market available. For example, the CO2 sequestration service. So it becomes challenge to actually value non-market services. In the literature, there is an approach which uses extent of ecosystems and then the unit value to actually evaluate those non-market ecosystem services. The unit value is basically developed bringing together like different streams of knowledge: ecology, economics, biology, biophysics, and many more fields. And then there are economic methods which actually integrate different like data information, and they actually generate these unit values. And then there is a very famous approach, BTM, or value transfer method, or actually benefit transfer method, which actually picks up these unit values from all these approaches and evaluates ecosystem services. So now the question is why ecosystem services values were not being included into policy making or decision making process. So the main reason for this was that those economic values were not based on the local ecosystems or local data, local information, and at the same time they had a large variation in them. So these were the reasons which were not making actually policymakers, allowing actually policymakers to include these economic values. But if we can evaluate ecosystem services like concisely, then there are so many uses. We can use these economic valuation of ecosystem services or values for actually raising public awareness. We can use them to to avoid ecological scarcity. They can be used to internalize ecosystem services, and they can be used in the land use planning and land management. So now I will share with you some of the applications of this approach here at local level. In the first like study, I will share with you that I've actually evaluated the largest watershed in southern Ontario, and I have evaluated its 4 ecosystem services and how I evaluated and how I used the local data. So I will share that with you in a sec. In the second study, I have evaluated actually different wetland types. Wetlands are one of the most valuable ecosystem, and therefore they have many types. So I will talk about this. In the third study, I will talk about that how the realized and the potential parts of ecosystem services can be separated, or how can we actually just actually like split them apart. And in the final study, I will show that how we can link ecosystem services with economic values. And in this for this work, I will show two examples from the local level where I'll show that how the water quality can be linked with economic values. So first, focusing on this valuation of four water related ecosystem services in the Grand River watershed. So this is the watershed, and you can see that it has many land uses, but these are the major land use types in the watershed. It is mainly under forest. So as I have shown you that the land use data is a data which is really needed for evaluating the non-market ecosystem services. So this was the land use for 2015, which is actual land use. But then we need to there is one thing in economic valuation of ecosystem services. Like sometimes just like people want to see that how the things have changed over time. So to actually visualize that information, or to make it like clear that how the ecosystem services have changed or the land uses have changed in this watershed, I've selected these 4 land use scenarios. The first one is for year 1800. That was the year before the European settlement. Second scenario is for year 1900. The third one is the current kind of like 2015, and then I've developed a future scenario for 2050. If we look at the land use, the major land use in this watershed was forest. Agriculture was approximately nil, like that was equal to 1%. But then forest went down in 1900, and agriculture went up to actually 80%, and the situation was pretty bad for ecosystem services in this time. However, then there is a regain of forest or the natural land use in the watershed, and that natural ecosystem has increased from 5 to 10%. And finally, there is a ECCC just like recommendation that there must be 30% forest in a watershed for functioning of like ecosystems and the natural ecosystems. Therefore, I have actually constructed this scenario for the future based on that recommendation of 30% forest in the watershed, and I have reduced agricultural land uses. If you look at the population, there were 2,600 people in 1800, which went up to 179,000 in 1900, and almost 1 million in 2015. And in the future, that number will go to almost 1.5 million. Then I've selected these 4 ecosystem services. Like one is the consumptive, this water supply service, and these three: water filtration, CO2 sequestration, and nutrient cycling. These are the non-consumptive ecosystem services. As they are the consumptive and the non-consumptive ecosystem services, basically you can say them the potential or the realized parts. So they need different types of economic valuation approaches, and at the same time they need different data sets for their economic valuation. So I've used these different economic valuation approach and this data and information, and there is a specific data needed for each ecosystem service to basically economically evaluate it. Using this data and valuation approaches, I came up with these numbers. I am just like summing up the value of the consumptive services over here, and this is the value of the consumptive service. So this is the value of those three non-consumptive ecosystem services. So you can see that the value of the consumptive service, which is basically water supply, that is increasing over time because that was being used by the people, and as the number of people are increasing in the watershed, the value of the water supply is increasing with time. But if you look at the non-consumptive services, like their value went down between here 1800 and 1900, and this was mainly due to actually reduction in forest land cover. But then there is a regain in the land cover, and the value is increasing from 1900, and it will keep increasing in the future if we can implement that 30% forest cover recommendation by ECCC, Environment and Climate Change Canada. If I split these like their values, so you can see that the most chunk of the values for non-consumptive ecosystem services was coming from the carbon from the CO2 sequestration service. And but when the value went down in 1900 and the forest actually declined in this scenario, the value of the carbon sequestration went down, but at the same time, water filtration went up. So here we can see that if there are the land use changes, so there are like different actually factors which impact the value of these ecosystem services. So the conclusion from this study are that I have applied the local values and the local data information to basically value these four ecosystem services. Therefore, they can make a significant like actually contribution towards like decision making at local level. Second one, I have evaluated all the major land use types in the watershed, which can also be like said that we have used the local data, local information, and based on that, we have valued these four ecosystem services. At the same time, this work shows that the consumptive and non-consumptive services need different economic valuation approaches. And forest is or actually natural land uses are the major actually factor which impact the value of the non-consumptive ecosystem services in this watershed. So this work is basically published as a chapter in this book. So if you want more information on economic valuation techniques, or you want to learn more about this specific valuation of four ecosystem services, you can read the third chapter of this book. Now, when I evaluated this watershed, I came to know that the most valuable ecosystem among all these ecosystems were actually wetlands. And if you zoom in, they have different types. For example, and here in the second study, I will show that how they can be evaluated differently. So wetlands are very prolific ecosystem, because they generate a lot of ecosystem services, and therefore they have maximum economic value among all ecosystems. But at the same time, they're very diverse in terms of their ecology, in terms of actually morphology, geology, and water conditions. If you look at the economic valuation literature, that actually combines them and assigns a single value, and therefore that does not include this diversity among these wetland types. Therefore, we need approaches. And if you look here in southern Ontario's landscape, there are 4 major types: bogs, fens, swamps, and marshes. Swamps are the largest or the biggest type with respect to area over here, like followed by these one, the marshes, and then bogs and fens. So if we specifically look at these different types of ecosystem services, we can say that we can see that they have their own salient or specific features. For example, the bogs, they are the ones which are actually just like the raised ones, and the water table is quite below the surface. If you look at the fens, there are pools of water, and the marshes, I mean, even more water. And here in the swamps, streams are flowing across these swamps. So based on these like peculiar or specific features, they generate a specific magnitude of an ecosystem service. Therefore, I put forth this economic valuation framework, which links the specificity of these wetlands with their functions, and then the functions are connected with ecosystem services, and finally we can apply economic valuation approaches on ecosystem services to infer economic value for an ecosystem service. So using this framework, I came up with these actually value functions for sediment filtration and phosphorus filtration, and these are mainly based on the sediment accretion rate for these 4 wetland types. When I applied and like supplied information in these value wetland functions, I came up with these economic values for 4 major wetland types. For bogs, and here, the values show me that the marshes are the most valuable type, followed by the bogs, swamps, and fens. And here you can say that there is a sediment actually filtration value, and here is the phosphorus filtration value. And if we sum them up, marshes have the maximum value among these 4 wetland types. But this is only for just like for one ecosystem service, and that is water filtration service, only for the sediment and phosphorus filtration. And if we apply these unit values on all wetland area in southern Ontario, they generate $4.5 billion per year in terms of water filtration service. So that is a quite huge number. Then I did cost effectiveness analysis, and that is based on a scenario where all these wetlands are lost and we need to take out only phosphorus, which is lost from these different wetlands. And I used 3 human-made alternatives. Those were BMPs, then the constructed wetlands, and then the wastewater treatment plant upgrades. So if you look at the total cost which we need to take out the phosphorus, which will be lost by converting these different wetlands types to actually agricultural lands, that is quite significant. It actually varies from $3 billion to $166 billion per year. So the conclusion from this study are that for water filtration service, marshes are the most valuable type, and fens are the least valuable type. All wetlands in this region provide $4.5 billion for water filtration service. And the cost effectiveness analysis showed that it is very expensive to actually replace these wetlands. So they are easy to actually protect than to replace with man-made infrastructure. So I actually published this paper last year, and it was like quite popular in the media. So some of the newspapers, they contacted me, interviewed me on this work, and then you can see their headlines. They show economic numbers. So it reflects that economic values are very catchy when it comes to saving natural ecosystems. In the third study, I have separated the potential and the realized ecosystem services. So I'll talk about that. So as initially I said that I have redefined or kind of actually modified definition of ecosystem services. I say that they are the services which are at our disposal and whether we use or not. So the potential ecosystem services is basically the full supply of ecosystem services from an ecosystem. And the used part of these potential ecosystem services is known as the realized ecosystem services. And now the problem is, how can we separate the realized part from the supply part? So, and why do we need to actually split the realized and the potential? The reason is the realized ecosystem services reflect our actually dependence on ecosystem services, and at the same time, if we can just like separate them, or just like we can show that where like what ecosystem services, what ecosystems are actually providing the realized ecosystem services, we can actually invest in nature more effectively. And but the realized ecosystem services, they are based on the population density, and that is the main factor, and therefore we can use the population in the region to actually separate the potential and the realized ecosystem services in the region. So I used an off-the-shelf tool to actually map these realized ecosystem services. That is the Caustic nature model. Caustic nature model has many biophysical actually models at its core for ecosystem services, and it uses a lot of information and data. It uses 80 input maps, but it can map 6 ecosystem services, mainly water ecosystem services. You can see water supply, water quality, flood regulation, and yeah, I mean, then the carbon sequestration, carbon storage, and the nature-based tourism. But the problem at that time when I used this model was that it was only mapping index values for these potential and the realized ecosystem services, and it was not evaluating the ecosystem services. So it was a challenge to link those index values. So here is the mapping of the potential ecosystem services using this Caustic nature model from the southern Ontario's landscape. And here are those index values or indices for potential ecosystem services. 0 means that there is no ecosystem service being actually generated, or and 1 means the maximum potential ecosystem service. So where we live, there are almost nothing being generated, or very less, like comparatively, because we have very less ecosystems or natural ecosystems on the places, or actually urban areas have less natural ecosystems. Then I put the economic values on these land use types, because economic values are also reflecting the potential ecosystem services. So the economic values most of the time are the potential ecosystem services values. So I used those values to evaluate this landscape, and I came up with a value of $19 billion for those 6 ecosystem services, which I've just shown. Then using the same tool, I mapped the realized ecosystem services in indices. So these are index values. And you can see that if we are living here in GTA, we are mostly using ecosystem services from the neighboring areas. This is the green belt area. So we are using a lot of services from there. Now the challenge was to actually conform these these indices into economic values. So what I did is that I actually put this the realized ecosystem services map on the top of the land use map, and then I've taken out uh, uh, area of ecosystem, those ecosystems underneath, and then I multiplied the value of uh, the potential value of those land uses with the realized service index, and I actually calculated the value of the realized ecosystem services, which is almost $9.7 billion per year. If we compare the potential and the realized values, we can see that the value of the realized ecosystem services is approximately 50% of the value of the potential ecosystem services from this landscape. So the conclusion from this study are that ecosystem services have real economic impact because they are being used by the people. And from this landscape of southern Ontario, we are using almost 50% of the supply of ecosystem services. And the value of the ecosystem services is basically depend on two main factors. One is the potential ecosystem services, and the second one is the number of people living there. So if we can increase the supply, we can increase the realized ecosystem services. The map of the realized ecosystem services can actually show the places where we need to invest to increase the supply or the potential ecosystem services from in the region. So I have actually just like published one main paper, which is just on this like work I have shown now, and then the second paper I like came up with, and that is about how can we link the realized ecosystem services with their like real users, and where are they? So to find them. In the final study, I will show that how water ecosystem services can be linked with economic values. And in this case, I have two examples to share with you. So before I just like jump into those examples, I want to show that how water cycle and ecosystem services are connected, or what is the link between them. So this is these are like different water fluxes we are very familiar with. There is rain, or actually precipitation, which falls on the land, and some of it goes into the soil and some flows on the land, and then finally it joins water bodies or wetlands, streams, or rivers. But at the same time, there are ecosystem services generated as a result of this flow of water through ecosystems. For example, CO2 sequestration, timber, recreation, water supply, and many more ecosystem services. So there is nowadays like watershed, and for water management, we need economic instruments, and economic instruments can be developed through valuation of these ecosystem services. So now I have specific talk about how we can link water quality with economic valuation, or what is the link between a water quality and economic values, or how can we link that? So here is the link. These actions means that the land use change, land management change, or the climate change that actually impacts these nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus flows into the lakes or water bodies. And then the plight of those water bodies is changed. For example, water clarity changes, algal blooms activity. I mean, that has changed. And then we can link this change with ecosystem services. And here you can see that swimming, boating, canoeing, like fishing, hydropower. So there are a number of ecosystem services which are impacted by this change. We do a lot of work in actually mapping this site, but this site here, ecosystem services changes are still needed to be linked with this site. And then these have like many biophysical units. Each ecosystem service has its own biophysical unit. So we need to reflect or change them into a single economic value or a single value, and that can be a single economic value. Economic value is very easy for many people to know, like what is economic impact, because we can easily see the numbers in economic terms. So now my first example, which I'm going to share with you, is about this lake Ontario, and this side of the lake. And you know that there are so many communities located along the lake shore. And at the same time, there are a lot of nutrients which flow from these communities or actually watersheds beyond these communities. And when they join the lake, they create algal blooms or eutrophication in the near shore waters of the lake. But if you look at this lake, how that algal bloom activity changed over time. So here you can see that this lake was quite fine around 1600, but then phytoplankton appeared around 1830, and there was a quite significant change between 1900 and 1945, and between 1945 and 1975, situation was really bad, and many people were not willing to actually live on the lakeshore. Then the situation improved between 1975 and 2000, and there is like a stable actually water conditions in the near shore zones of this lake between 2000 and 2014. But then there is again mild eutrophication since 2015. So now I will make a link like how these changes in the near shore water quality will impact ecosystem services, and what type of ecosystem services are being actually impacted. There are so many ecosystem services which I've shown that that are connected with change in water quality, for example, water supply, and many more. But there is one type of ecosystem service. Those are known as the cultural ecosystem services, which are very valuable but are non-material. For example, the recreational activities and the lakeshore properties and their value. So today I will just focus on the lakeshore properties and how their value is connected with changes in water quality. So first of all, I have to show that if there is any link between, is there any impact of the lake at all on the lakeshore properties, and why we actually care about these lakefront properties. So the most chunk of a city's revenue that comes from these lakefront properties in terms of the property tax. And here you can see our city is generating almost like 33% of its revenue from the property tax. And the most valuable properties are the lakefront properties, and we know it. And then they are cared by the people who live there because they have the property, and if the value goes down, that can be a real shock for them. So if you look at the literature, between there is a link between the property prices and the water quality. Here I show the price premium. Price premium is a relative change in the value of the lakefront properties with respect to the non-lakefront properties. And here I show the marginal water quality change in the lakes. And these are like different sites located in North America. Here you can see these are the places. And you can see that there is a significant actually price premium attached to adjoining water lakes or actually water bodies. So there is a price premium of 0.3 to 24.3% for the lakeshore properties that can be assigned to the marginal improvement in water quality of adjoining lakes. But how we compute this price premium? In economics, there is an approach and that uses multivariate regression analysis that is known as hedonic pricing model, which actually splits the sale price of the properties into different they're actually characteristics. For example, the structural characteristics, the neighborhood characteristics, and environmental, for example, water quality change. And then we need to feed in this equation a lot of data, and we need statistical expertise to basically compute the price premium. If you look on this side of the lake, there are 14 lakefront communities located on the lake. We are very familiar with these communities, starting from Clarington to actually Niagara on the lake. So I've selected this site and these communities. So now the first question is, what is the price premium for lakefront properties in these communities because of lake? Is there any impact of the lake on the lakefront properties? So to see this, I have zoned. I have actually created zones along this side of the lake, and each zone has its specific name. There are 14 communities, 8 zones per community, total 112 zones. So if I zoom a section of these zones, they look like this. Each zone has a specific name. The number changes as we go away from the lakeshore, and the letter indicates the first letter of the name of the community. And each zone has a specific width. The first 2 zones have equal width, but then the width is increasing because I want to see mainly impact just on the lakefront, and then how it changes as we move away from the lake. Then I need a lot of data information, and there are actually dependent variable, and those are the prices of these properties. And there are independent variables, for example, the population and the number of the properties in these zones. So I collected this information on these points along the lakeshore. So each point represents 45 values for 3 property types. And then there are 30 values. Each point is representing 30 values for the population and the number of the properties, because they are the data is collected over 15 years. So for example, for 3 properties, like 45, 15 times 3, 45 actually price values. And then I just did interpolation and calculated average value for each zone. If you look at this data information, it shows that the values are increasing over time. Here I show only 3 communities, and these are the zones. So values are increasing over time in these communities. At the same time, there is some specific effect in the zones, because every zone has its own value, and the relative change remains the same. Here I show the value in 3 zones, and these are the communities. And as we go across time, the value is increasing over time. Same here for all 3 zones, but there is, again, the relative change almost remains same, and that is mainly because of some specific effect of the community. So there is a place-based thing. So we need to figure out what is that. So as I have shown you, actually economic approach, but that cannot be applied over here in this case, because there are the fixed effects, and those fixed effects are maybe same across all those communities and zones, but then there are the random effects, and the random effects are the specific ones for each zone and for each community. So we need to figure out those one. So for this one, I used like this, the mixed effect model, which can capture both the fixed and the random effects across these zones and the communities. So this is the actual model which I have applied. This is the property price, and B naught is like beta naught is the fixed effect, and beta 1 is the coefficient for fixed effects, and UI is the random effects. So I applied this model and approach only on zone 1 and zone 2 at the moment, and for 3 times, 2006, 2011, and 2016. And I've used average values for YI, which is the price of the properties. So these are my results for actually mix effects for each community and zone. And so you can see that most of the communities and their first zone along the lake has actually more value than the zone 2 or their second zone. So if we calculate the price differential between zone 1 and zone 2, which is simply actually that is mixed effect of zone 1 minus mixed effect of zone 2, and that is known as the price differential. So you can see that there are mainly positive values across most of the communities. So, and the average price differential between zone 1 and zone 2 is 20,000 Canadian dollars. And the price premium, if we calculate the price premium for all these communities for the lake for the zone 1, that is again significant and quite positive along the lakeshore, and that is 17%. So 17% price premium is attached to the zone 1 as compared to the zone 2, and the price change or the growth rate over time, that is again larger in the zone 1 as compared to the zone 2. So inferences from this study are that the mixed effect model can capture these variations in the panel data. So my approach was quite fine in terms of capturing the fixed and the random effects in these communities and zones. And there is average price differential of 20,000, which is attached to the zone 1. So it means that there is impact of the lake on the values of the lakefront properties. If the property is just on the lake, it has more value, and we know it, but we need to compute it. And then there is a price premium of 17% attached to the properties in zone 1. If we want to attach this price or actually impute this price premium with the water quality changes in the lake, we need more information and data on water quality. For example, the chlorophyll A data in the lake, because that has been changing over time, and that is actually a proxy for algal blooms in the lake. So similarly, applying this mixed effect model, we can impute some portion of this 17% to the water quality changes in the lake. In the second example, as we know that the nitrogen is a very essential nutrient for agricultural yield, but if we can applying this nutrient over a long time, it can actually degrade water quality, and therefore it threatens human health and increases environmental costs. So here is a site in Woodstock, a small site, 111 hectares, and the water quality went down due to actually nitrate leaching. So then the BMPs were implemented here, and the main thing for those BMPs, or their main impact was actually reducing nitrogen application on this land. And then I computed these 4 benefits which are generated by reducing those nitrogen applications on the landscape, on this land. So here I show the reduction in N application, and here I show the value of those 4 benefits which are being actually just like generated. Those are the subsurface water protection and surface water protection, air quality, and the climate benefits. And then there are the fertilizer savings, because if we apply less fertilizer, we are saving some value, or actually some money on that as well. So here you can see that the potential gain is increasing over time, and then there is a cost, because, and here I'm just using the traditional approach that agricultural yield is basically linked to the fertilizer application, and that will actually decrease, but there is a net increase in the benefits, and that is this one. In fact, on this parcel of land, there is no decrease in agricultural yield, even if they have reduced actually nitrogen applications to 46%. So to summarize this talk, as I've just like talked about ecosystem services approach, it is a very useful approach. We can use it for economic valuation of ecosystem services. Can be like make a significant impact in on the table where decisions are being taken. And at the same time, this economic valuation approach reflects changes in environmental conditions, whether it is a lake or a landscape. And then we can refine this approach by using local data, local information, and applying some tools which can distinguish the realized and the used part. And we need more work to do here, because we need to link water ecosystem services with economic valuation, and that can make our work more effective and more impactful. Finally, this work was not possible without financial and intellectual support of a few people, and those are Philippe Van Capellen at University of Waterloo, and at the same time Dr. Dave Rudolph. So I'm really thankful of their support, and I thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tariq. That was very interesting. I think for someone like me who has no background in that area, it will take a while to digest. There's a lot of new information and things that I don't know very well, but it's super interesting.